It's public-private partnership, right? That's the euphemism. What that is corruption. This is
Mhm.
not helping anybody. It's only making certain people rich. And for the American people, for the fans of mixed martial arts, for the fans in the audience who hear that guy say that about Michelle Obama, the question is, in this era in which so many people are suffering, who's winning? Who's getting rich? And you may notice that the people who are getting rich are the ones that are, in fact, transacting and using sports,
Yeah.
using your emotional long-held heirlooms, your family heirlooms, for their own benefit. That's who's winning.
Hi there, everyone. What does the Ultimate Fighting Championship, those guys who fight each other shirtless and wearing tights inside an actual cage, have to do with foreign aid? Well, just about everything these days, according to my next guest. Pablo Torre is a brilliant, now Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. He's also the host of the podcast Pablo Torre Finds Out. He has unearthed some of the biggest scoops, not just in sports, but in all of journalism over the last few years. He's also been one of the sharpest, most astute observers out there about exactly how MAGA is hijacking sports in an attempt to remake the country and its image. So without any further ado, this is the best people, and this is one of them, Pablo Torre. Thank you so much for being here.
Nicole, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet right now of sports and corruption, and I am very glad to talk about whatever you'd like from that selection with you.
It's a poo-poo platter, right? And it's like there's a tendency, I feel like, to put sports at the end of a newscast. I think that comes from local news, right? And I think the history of that, right, was to make everybody watch all of that 23-minute local newscast. So you tease sports and weather at the end because that's what people really needed. But with Trump, it's a mistake to separate them. Why do you think Democrats are so late to recognize the impact and the import of sports?
I think we could be a little too high-minded sometimes. And I get it because my whole thing in sports is I'm the guy who's trying to convince everybody else, hey, sports is a liberal arts education. We should and are empowered to, in fact, obligated to talk about everything as it connects to all of the issues that have always been in sports. But that's inside of sports. When I get to the place that I've been enjoying being in cable news and in political conversation in the last several years, it's the reverse dynamic. When I got to convince people, hey, this sports thing's pretty popular. And if we're going to fight a culture war as a civilization, you might want to know which terrain the opposition has already taken the high ground on. And for me, look, it's just basic math. If you're fighting a culture war and the monoculture, the biggest cultural institution available, happens to be sports, it would be insane and self-defeating to cede that territory, especially when the people who are planting their flag on it are themselves pretenders, pretending in ways that they are getting away with because of the lack of fluency, maybe, in the subject matter, which is one reason why I love talking to you, because you know sports. And the second thing is,
I
on
don't know if
top of
I
the
know it, but
fluency,
I love it. I mean, it's both of it, right? Like you know it, you have the fluency piece, but to know it, you have to love it first. And I guess I worry about the loving it piece. Who are all these
yes.
people in public life who don't love sports?
I think that sports, you mentioned, right? Like sports has been effectively the toy department. We look
Mm,
down our nose through our reading glasses at sports, collectively speaking, as like proper, whatever, journalists or again, highbrow consumers and purveyors of political information. But in reality, what sports is an incredible TV show that, sure, has various aspects that should make you a bit discomfited in terms of corruption and conflicts of interest and all of that. But really, what it is what and how America talks to itself. This is how we communicate with each other. And so I don't think you need to be an advanced PhD level student of sports literature to understand why it matters. All you got to do is feel what I think people in New York, for instance, but
mm,
people around the world, for instance, are feeling right now, which is what it's like when there is something that is not explicitly political that actually energizes you into something like self-organization in large groups. And that is so much of what the Democratic Project, small d and large d, the Democratic Project should be obviously hungering for. How do you get people to
Mhm.
turn out? Why are people caring about this? Why are they
Yeah.
tuning in? Why are people gathering? Why are they feeling good about themselves and even more than that, hopeful? How can
Yeah.
it be that you can feel hopeful right now because a bunch of dudes that you don't know that are so rich are playing basketball? How can that be? And that curiosity can spark
Mm.
love. It can
Yeah.
spark addiction at its darkest. But really, what it does, it sparks feelings. And that
Right.
is so scarce. The notion of, wait a minute, there's potency in human feeling that can be harnessed for good or, in cases that we're seeing on TV as well, for bad.
All right, so I think you just perfectly described everyone's love for the Knicks and for this team. Let's start with the Knicks. We'll start with the sublime, and then we'll
Please.
go to the surreal and beyond. Why does this Knicks win feels so huge. And I'm biased, right? I'm a New Yorker. I'm a fan. I love this team. I love everything Jalen Brunson says. I love Cat. I love that he's grieving for his mother and achieving the heights of athletic dominance and accomplishment. But it doesn't feel like you have to feel what you just described, this joy if you're in New York or if you're a New Yorker for their big win.
Yeah. So much of the joy and so much of the disruption that happened when Trump went to game 3 and was paraded in by the commissioner of the NBA and by the owner of the team, his friend, Trump's friend, James Dolan, as this
Mhm.
lifelong fan of the team, who made it so that you couldn't even watch the game outside Madison Square Garden because the security
Yeah.
state needed to be even more secure. Part of the reason that mattered was because whether or not you're a super fan of the team, one of the best experiences you could have as a New Yorker, and I'm saying all time, I've been here for 40 years, born and raised, all time experiences was watching this team with total strangers.
Yes.
And there's something you mentioned Carl Anthony Towns. The pandemic is the backdrop for this to me in a way that's been underrated.
It gives me chills.
It's the experiment that we all lived through, and Carl Anthony Towns, his mother, did not. His mom died of COVID. And amid all of the ways in which Anthony Fauci needs to have full time private security because it is unsafe for him to be out in the world having been the guy who tried to steer us through this, whatever, leave your politics aside for a second. Carl Anthony Towns has been this avatar for people who lost something. And
Mm,
he is the human face, a voice to say, this happened to me. I know it happened to so many of you. And this is a city that was a locus for that tragedy. And the reason that informs my goosebumps too, when I think about how
mhm.
great an ambassador he has been to that suffering, is that the celebration that's happening in the street is us thawing out of that pandemic stasis in which we forgot and frankly suffered. We
Yeah,
suffered because we weren't connecting with others, human physical bodies up close celebrating something. And that celebration, um, it's something that I haven't felt ever in my life in New York City, not like this.
mm,
And so I think
yeah.
in terms of what is different about New York City, the people who self-select into it, we have realized that at some point, the best thing to be is surrounded by our fellow man. And that is what
Totally.
this Knicks run reminded of us about. That's what the pandemic stole from us. That's why this is a story about the fans as much as it is the players and certainly the owner. And that's why this is a bandwagon that welcomes the non-fan. Casuals are welcome.
Yes.
New York, Nicole, you know this. New York at its best is a bandwagon. It is a club that anyone can join because everyone who's been there for decades knows how much better it gets when there's more of us. And
It's
that's the
so
power of
true.
sports.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, there's also like at a time when no one in the political arena in power is anything you'd want your child to emulate. Jalen Brunson is everything you want your kid to grow up believing, that you can be doubted, you can be counted out, you can be, um, questioned in terms of your God given gifts, and you can work your way through it. You can believe. Talk about him, not just as a sports story, but as a human story.
Oh, so Jalen Brunson, the knock on him for no for sort of like understandable reasons is he's too small to be the best player on a championship team. And so for those who missed the sort of like theater here, you had Jalen Brunson in the deciding clinching game 5 of this championship up against Victor Wembanyama, who is a fascinating character, but his most distinguishing characteristic is that he's enormous. He's 7'6" or 7'7", thereabouts. He is Goliath, and here is David. And so Jalen Brunson, who is likable in ways that are just, sometimes as a sports fan and as a sports journalist, certainly, you kind of hold your nose when you are celebrating or praising or telling the story of something. You tell it in full context, but you sort of know, like, this is kind of gross. This is not one of those stories. The story of Jalen Brunson is that of the little guy who overcame Goliath. And the reason why that's especially meaningful in this context, and I was thinking about, like, what is it about New York that's not just ivory tower bubble, allegedly stuff that has been resonating here? And what is it about the United States that could learn a lesson from that?
Mm,
So much of what this title has been, headed by Jalen Brunson, has been the ability to be both David and Goliath.
mm,
Like, New York City is the biggest city in the world. Just listen to us talk about it, right? The phrase, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere,
mm,
is someone trying to be both David and Goliath. It's impossible to make it here, but if you do, you're the best. And we are a city
mhm,
of exactly that sensation. The United States, quite similarly, loves to be the underdog, effectively, infinitely, and eternally waging
mhm,
a revolution against the British Empire, but also now, of course, the dominant world power. The Knicks and the United States, and even Jalen Brunson, who is now going to reckon with what it's like to be overpraised, right? That's going to be the risk
mhm.
now that you win.
Yeah.
How do you handle all of that? You need someone who has some sense of proportion and who knows the power of trying to have your cake and eat it too, and using that in a way that doesn't make you gross, but makes you inspiring. Because now you can speak to the whole amphitheater, the entire arena, the entire country, the entire city can learn a lesson from you, whether you see yourself as the favorite or the underdog. And that is, by the way, that is a bipartisan political power that is encapsulated in the story of this 6 foot something, allegedly, small guard that took a knife into his teeth and scored 45 points in game 5 while the rest of his teammates scored 49. That is also the legend that's made real.
So perfectly fine. I could listen to you talk about Jalen Brunson and the Knicks for the whole time.
A good
What is
Catholic
it?
boy as well, by the way, Villanova. Shout
Well,
out to the Pope. Yeah.
and to dad. I mean, I don't know
Yes.
how many people realize that his dad was one of his coaches.
Yeah. No, look, the whole thing of this being a family affair and Rick Brunson is his dad, former Nick, assistant coach. It's funny. The whole thing of like the joke with this team was, what if the real championship was the friends we made along the way? Because it was him and his college friends. It was Josh Hart, Villanova, Mikal Bridges, Villanova, Dante DiVincenzo,
Who
Villanova.
left
Then they
last year,
traded
right?
him.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in a heartbreaking move that ended up getting
Yes.
Karl Anthony Towns aforementioned to the team in part. But the whole thing of like, what if the power of friendship could win an NBA title was the joke.
Yeah.
Family and friends. It's feel good in a way that I have like elephant skin to a lot of the things we cover in sports that make other people cry. This one has pulled at my heartstrings in ways that speak to both me being from here, but also just knowing a special story that still is sort of introducing itself to people. And I love people getting to know a great sports story because I can
Yeah.
sense them becoming fans. And
Yes.
and look, my very hot take is that we're a better country if we have more sports fans.
I
if we all
completely
can speak
agree.
that language.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think as a long-suffering Mets fan, we're having like an historically disastrous season. It's been wonderful not to pay attention to baseball, which I never say until mid-June. What do you think is wrong with the Mets on the other end of that spectrum?
You know, the answer that I've always had to that question is the stuff I would say when someone asks that same question, but with the word Knicks instead of Mets,
Yeah.
which is it feels like there is something darker and mystical at play. It feels like there is the universe suggesting that maybe you are meant to be one character in this play and not the other. And I think now I have to reckon with the fact that anything is possible.
Yeah.
That's the feeling. Now, on the ground,
Scaramucci
in
has a
reality,
similar answer to this question. Anthony Scaramucci is another long-suffering Mets fan, and he said, "I think there's something about the spirits underneath Citi Field." Like he thinks there's something like metaphysical that explains the Mets this year.
I dare say that a Met fan has scar tissue that can be read, can be felt like you're reading a palm that says, "You will not see 1986 again. You
But
will not."
is it that, or is it that Stearns traded away the guys who were Mets in their guts and their hearts and brought in people who might not be that yet or ever?
Well, this is the thing that the Knicks have taught me, and I have various sorts of evidence-based takes. I'm trafficking a lot in like the Santeria now of sports with you as we talk about the spirits and mystique and aura and all those things that Kurt Schilling once made fun of when it came to Yankee Stadium. He said mystique and aura are dancers in a nightclub. And this city is talking all the time about just like the metaphysical. I dispute that. I dispute Kurt Schilling for lots of reasons, that just being one of them. But I do think that if you're going to rebuild a team and you're going to do it with a guy who is the richest owner in baseball, which by some metrics, Steve Cohen is, of course, the owner of the team, and you're going to bring in a guy, by the way, Dave Stearns is my classmate from college. I've
Oh,
known
really?
Dave Stearns wrote on the school newspaper with me. He was a sports writer that I know well. So that is my disclosure of personal conflict. It's been very surreal for me to see the back pages and to see him in the dunk tank. And it's not for a lack of justification. Like the team has been horrific, and the moves he's made have only resulted in people thinking to themselves, "Do you understand this city? You know, do you understand what it is to be a winner? Do you understand what it is to have the Mets, as you put it, in your soul?" This is where I think that being evidence based leads me to want a bit more patience with what he's trying. But I get it.
Well,
I get it.
let me just argue as a non-baseball expert, a, travel baseball mother, and a
Yeah.
season ticket holder. To look at the Mets organization and take out the guys who were Mets in their hearts and souls, forget about that too. Just go look at the kind of season that Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso and
Yeah.
Jeff McNeil are having, and Edwin Diaz. I mean, if you just look at it the way those guys allegedly look at it from a statistic standpoint, they traded people that were better than the ones that they got, no?
Yeah. I love that we're doing PTI right now, by the way. I love that you claim to not know baseball and now you're throwing Brandon Nimmo at me.
We love Brendan Nimmo so much, and like, and he was like the guy that if you were the mother of a student athlete, like you're
Yeah.
looking for role models, especially if you cover Donald Trump for your day job. And Nimmo was a guy who every manager, and I think there have been three since I've been a season ticket holder, said the same thing about Brendan Nimmo. He was there, the first person there when they left, and after games he'd be, in the batting cage still practicing at night when they went home. So he's a guy who is just a baseball player through and through.
Yeah. The thing I always say when it comes to taking over a team as the head of baseball operations or basketball operations is that we immediately find out whether you can tell who is good at baseball or not. Like
Mm.
he will be evaluated on his report card and it will be unsparing. And so for me, what I lean on is trying to take the 53 years of Nick's futility in mind. It's, do you have the long view of the team? I don't have a way of defending Dave Stearns except to say, next season, the season after that, should he survive that long, we'll have a greater sample size. But that is, my gosh, that is cold comfort.
Yeah, and I think that the fans have been through, to your broader point about Towns. I mean, the fans have been through a lot, and I think the fans should be the arbiters. But we'll see. We'll see. I can't boo.
Oh, but I get it. I get it. And can I just say one more thing, though, about like booing and criticism? Because this all folds in together, actually.
Yeah.
It's the idea of sports are hard. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to be pedantic, but I mean to say this as the ultimate compliment to people who do it.
Right.
You are tested every day under a public scrutiny that is, frankly, unrivaled, even considering political attention. Because as much as I wish people were paying more attention to the memorandum of understanding with Iran, and as much as I hope people are following the price of polypropylene and Anthropic, what I really have a sense of is how closely they're following how Brandon Nimmo is doing. And so there's this spotlight from this common cause populist instinct to really care about sports that either melts you or it makes you stronger, like you're Superman feeling the power of the sun. And New York has weeded those people out for a long time. Jalen Brunson, Superman. This is also why when someone wins, it is not an abstract golf clap. It's a full-throated, oh my God, you were almost humiliated, and instead you are the opposite. And that is power from any perspective.
I think it's why I've projected onto some of the league's grave disappointment, bordering on despair, at the silence until the Minnesota Timberwolves spoke out after the murder of two U.S. citizens on the streets of Minneapolis. Just talk about that story and its intersection with not just politics in general, but the second Trump term as president and sports.
Yeah, sports has been way too quiet. Sports is an untapped culture war territory, an untapped vector of organization. I come at that take because I've been disappointed by how underutilized sports has been as the megaphone that is now clearly conclusively established as the loudest one we got. 2020, during the pandemic, during Black Lives Matter, during that social movement, it was so much louder.
Yeah.
And now, as this administration is that much worse and that much more obviously corrupt and transactional and rigging the American economy and, by the way, our justice system and granting through the power of the pardon immunity from anything resembling accountability while favoring the richest among us, right? Like all of that's happening to a degree that is just so embarrassing. It's like third world level stuff. And yet sports, because they see the transactionality, because they see it, they have decided to transact. They've decided to participate in the crony capitalism writ large because they fear what will happen if the president punishes you in all of these extrajudicial ways.
But you're right to sort of sit with it. In your view, is it transacting to benefit, or is it transacting out of fear? Like, is it to gain something positive, or is it to avoid something negative, or both?
I think it's both. I think more generously it's defense, but I think when you have an ownership class that has great overlap, by the way, with all of the social networks that we've been inspecting, the Epstein class, as well as just the simple richest people in the world, any list of that, it's the same folks. I mean, Nicole, as somebody who studies and investigates sports business, and you know this, the places that sports is looking, owners are looking for money because sports is growing, right? In our business, in media, sports is the most valuable and most economically thriving property. The green arrow is up and to the right, seemingly at this rate, forever. It's winning and no one else is. And so then the question is, how do you keep the money flowing? Because as we all know, the media economy, cable rights deals, television media rights deals, they've all been disrupted by the internet. The business is not the same. And so where is sports turning? They're turning to sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East. They're turning to private equity, to institutional investors. They're turning to crypto. They're turning to sports gambling. They're turning to all of the places that this administration is also turning. And
Mm.
so generously, they're playing defense, but really what they're trying to do is keep the money flowing. And who has the money? And what are the limits on how we can access that money? And it goes through the White House. And this is not even theoretical. It's literally, if you look at everyone's jerseys, they sell jersey patches. You see
Yeah.
who are these companies? What are the names? Crypto.com Arena. FTX was sponsoring at one point the literal chess plate on umpires in Major League Baseball games. Like, we are constantly seeing in sports the same behaviors enacted by the same people that we are
Yeah.
covering in politics. They're just doing it over here in the toy department. And so there's a bit of a lag in terms of realizing, I think this is all the same population transacting with itself. And that's I think, borne out by the evidence.
Where does that leave an individual athlete who feels the need to speak out about something? Are they self-censoring? Are they asked not to speak out? Are they not engaged? What's your sense?
I relate to some of what they must be feeling, which is like, look, there's an amazing party right now. You don't want to be the guy raising his hand and saying, hey, I'd like to scold everyone.
And the party is the money.
The party is the money. The party might be the championship. It's all in the service of things are so great right now. People are feeling good. How can you invade this with reality? And this is where I'm very glad we talked romantically and metaphysically about sports, because the thing that sports is threatened by more than anything else is not, is there enough money? Because there's plenty of it if you are someone who can feel anything resembling satisfaction at being number one, right? The issue is that the people who run sports, the people who are inhabiting sports, players and owners included, you run the risk of alienating fans and customers if it feels like you are not one of them. And I think that's this gap, Nicole, that this administration has been trying to walk, using sports as their costume. We're one of you. Yes, gas prices are unbelievably expensive, and no, you can't afford to be in the building, but we're going to have a UFC event. I'm going to fall asleep in a luxury box, right? They're pretending to be one of you using sports, but in reality, they are daring the audience to think to themselves, are they using us to achieve something like their own self-interest? And when the money in sports is going up and up and up, what you're losing is the viability of that owner to make decisions that are in line with what a fan wants. And I say this in a very direct way. For so long, the number one most important thing in sports has been winning basketball games, winning football games, winning baseball games, winning championships, right? Winning. And we're running the risk right now of the affordability crisis around sports being so out of whack that even the richest billionaires in America individually cannot buy these teams. That's sort of where we're headed. We're headed to a world in which only institutional investors can buy these things, and those institutions are not even crazed individual fan billionaires. They're just entities that are seeking to extract every bit of margin out of their assets. And winning for them is not their number one goal. Their number one goal is profit. And
Mm.
so with the silence, with the lack of pushback upon our politics that enables this economic disparity and the economic disparity itself, we are running the risk of effectively fracking sports. We're running the risk of poisoning the ecosystem by drilling for more money and jeopardizing the entire reason it's special in the first place. And that is politically, that is economically, and this is certainly when it comes to corruption in our administration that is incentivizing this usage and this abuse, really, of the public trust.
A perverse example, I think, is the UFC fight. I mean, you've got an event that was so gross that Dana White, the president of UFC, attacked the fighter who smeared Michelle Obama, and none of the corporate sponsors did. Like, that
Yep.
isn't a UFC story anymore. That is a story of the cowardice and the moral bankruptcy of Facebook and Crypto.com and all the corporate sponsors of the UFC event.
It's cowardice. I mean, we're being tested
It's
all of the
something
time with like,
darker, isn't it? I mean, cowardice would have been the fighters not saying anything because they were that you get the president of the UFC saying that what the fighter said should be denounced. You had the Barstool guy, Dave
yeah,
Portnoy, saying you
I
have to
know.
denounce. Joe Rogan in his like bizarrely short, ugly tie stood there with a grin on his face, and all of the fancy corporate sponsors just sat there acting like they liked a sport where the only rule is no biting, men in
Yeah,
tights without shirts screaming ugly smears about Michelle Obama.
it's a really good point, because cowardice implies that you fear that you will be victimized, and this is not quite that. This is a lot of people who have collectively more power than anyone else who is in the audience deciding to remain silent because it's good for their self-interest. And that's worse. It's villainous to stand by and somehow Dana White ends up being the voice of respectability here.
She's
Um,
appalling on a million
which is
different
insane. And
levels.
by the way, like that whole event, right? Like this is the story of a business partnership. This is Dana White and the UFC, which has long been the safe space for Donald Trump, right? He has felony convictions. He is now unpopular because his fans have insurrected the Capitol on January 6th. He's facing whatever PR crisis. He shows up almost inevitably at a UFC event and he's applauded.
Mhm.
This has been his safe space forever. And so this business partnership, which is not coincidental when Dana White has been a speaker at the literal RNC year after year after year,
Mhm.
praising Trump, introducing him like he's Melania. You know, that job that typically goes to the
Someone
spouse.
has
Dana
to do
White
it.
walks him out. No, it's crazy. And he walks him out. And what does he get out of it? He gets a partnership with the State Department, as Marco Rubio announced it last week during the week of this fight, in which effectively the things they had cut from the USAID budget under the Doge program, they are regrafting onto the UFC.
It's
They're going
insane.
to have UFC fights in all these countries and export American values.
It's
Like
insane. It's insane.
it's public-private partnership, right? That's the euphemism. What that is corruption. This is
Mhm.
not helping anybody. It's only making certain people rich. And for the American people, for the fans of mixed martial arts, for the fans in the audience who hear that guy say that about Michelle Obama, the question is, in this era in which so many people are suffering, who's winning? Who's getting rich? And you may notice that the people who are getting rich are the ones that are, in fact, transacting and using sports,
Yeah.
using your emotional long held heirlooms, your family heirlooms, for their own benefit. That's who's winning.
What is the remedy? I mean, what is it? Because I think that one mistake people make is ever covering any aspect of the Trump story is fixed. It's all very dynamic. And I saw a poll, only 16% of Americans approved of the fight at the White House. What is the risk for any sport in associating itself with Donald Trump if you're going to drop to a 16% approval rating in the country?
We're in like the smash and grab, like, era of this. I've thought of, frankly, the White House kind of like a spirit Halloween store after Halloween, where it's like, this isn't going to last much longer, we're pretty sure, but there's some stuff in the back you might want to sell. So let's get some of the weird stuff out of here. I mean, it's just it's a level of sort of like desperation that is undergirding all of this. It feels that way,
Mhm.
at least. And I hope that there's a time limit on this. But look, what do you do as a response to this? You don't cede sports as this cultural territory. I mean, there are ways to be credibly, right, persuasively American that only require you to enjoy watching the game. And what does that unlock, right? Why do I start with that very simple premise? It's because once that happens, when there is a news cycle like the New York Knicks or like what's happening in the World Cup or a UFC event, right? You too can be in the conversation. And you too, I mean, this is my theory of why I do the journalism I do. It's that I started off with a love of sports, but I've considered, like, should I pivot away because I have these other interests? And I've continually been astounded by how sports is the cheese I can melt on the broccoli of all of this other stuff.
I love that.
This can be delicious. This can be nourishing. This can be something that is important, even that can teach you some things. And we're just going to do it by making it, and this is a crucial part of this, actually fun. And so the megaphone is available to everybody. And I think to your point, like in your Golden State Warriors, we have a character in Steve Kerr who is a
Mhm.
voice that has been using that megaphone.
Mhm.
We need more.
Yeah.
It's time. It's time to realize that the clock is ticking. The polling is showing one very clear thing, and that it is so unpopular to be in favor of all of the people that I have been both investigating and describing critically here who are getting rich at your expense. The pendulum, Tim Walz was this sort of like, to me, lost opportunity in ways that continue to confound me. Like, here was a football coach. Why wasn't he more football? Like, why did that not work
Why
as a
wasn't he
matter of
more Friday
credibility?
Night Lights? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Like, and I'm not saying that we prop up just an empty suit who can say, a cheap motivational speech, but I look at what's happening in New York City with the mayor, Zohran Mamdani, and some of it, of course, you should see cynically. Another
Mhm.
politician using sports for his own political ends, sure. But the dude actually can credibly speak like a sports fan, and it enables something like a galvanization of people who otherwise maybe wouldn't relate to him at all. But Nicole, it's funny, right? Like New York City, as much as we're like this whatever bubble that is caricatured all the time on Fox News and
Yeah.
elsewhere, the idea of Mayor Zohran Mamdani winning the hearts of Knicks fans, Madison Square Garden is not a leftist
No.
enclave.
No, no. Pablo, the World Cup stories about America's look on the world stage are not good, from rejecting one of the most highly regarded and respected referees to harassing teams with onerous drug inspections and whatnot. What does America look like around the world?
I mean, it looks like what FIFA has long preferred, which is a compliant autocracy that has the
Mm.
characteristics of third world government that is willing to do business with the most corrupt governing body on planet Earth in sports, which is the aforementioned FIFA. It's not surprising, but it is a bummer, I would say, to
Mm.
see America not sort of stiffen its spine enough to say that, like, hey, what FIFA wants here, we don't quite need like this. So we don't need to expend public money like this. We don't need to perform like we are desperate because we're the
Mm.
United Bleeping States of America.
Mm.
But it's not just that. It's the fact that, of course, under this administration, they've found a kindred spirit.
Mm.
FIFA presented Donald Trump with this peace prize that I have no idea if it'll ever be presented to anyone ever again. But certainly Donald Trump was the first and the effectively the only winner. By the way, FIFA cannot be blamed for the fact that the United States is at war with Iran, a war of choice that is unfolding as we speak, while also hosting that same country at the World Cup, which means that they are also forcing the Iranian players which were supposed to stay in the United States, to Mexico, which is one of the other host countries here. It's Canada, the US, and Mexico.
Mhm.
It's just a surreal, it's an embarrassing spectacle. On top of that, by the way, you have the local municipal governments who have been answering FIFA's beck and call.
Mhm.
Nicole, there's a story we reported on our show with The Athletic and the New York Times in which Kansas City paid $15 million of public money to construct a pop-up jail to house people who would have been arrested during the World Cup. And this jail, there's video that we play of it, this jail being revealed, being announced to the politicians who signed off on it. And you hear in the hot mic tape that we have them comparing it to an ICE detention facility
Jesus.
because there are no windows, because it looks like a warehouse. It is all of those things. And in fact, it was constructed by the same folks who built Guantanamo Bay. Like, this is all, again, the same stuff swirling inside of the same story. And of course, the kicker to that story, the $15 million in public money that went towards funding it, is that the jail wasn't finished in time. And so now Kansas City is claiming, oh, actually, this is part of a longer term project beyond the World Cup, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, even the corruption, even the quid pro quo transactionality is incompetent. And so that's also the story of the World Cup, on top of the fact that, oh, by the way, yeah, some of the greatest soccer players are here, and we're just hoping that ICE won't detain any of them in the process, which is an open experiment that we are also conducting right now.
I mean, I think that's the inner thought of most Americans with a conscience. How do you sort of live this at home? Like, are you a sports house? Do you have sports on? Are you watching the game? Are you imparting the lessons about sportsmanship? Or what is your personal application of all of this?
I have never felt more like a dad who is lapsing into like locker room cliches. It's hard not to sort of inadvertently be the thing I thought I was too cool to be, as a sports fan, which is like, wait a minute, why am I telling my daughter to trust the process? Why am I telling my daughter to take it one day at a time? Why am I telling her all of these lessons that feel like I heard it first in like in Rudy? Like I'm just that now.
Remember the Titans? Yeah.
Remember
Yeah.
the Titans. I'm tearing up at things. I'm a bundle of cliches. I want to be the guy who's like ahead of the curve. And I realize I am very, very much my parents. I am reenacting the traditions of sports. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because that's how I learned it. That's how I find it most powerful. And my daughter, who is 6, who I'm not going Earl Woods, I'm not going Richard Williams, but my favorite thing with her is to play catch.
We make jokes in our house about Earl Woods when we go hit like after practice. But it is a thing to just be mindful of how we impart our love of sports and athletes and all those lessons on our kids and on our homes as parents.
And I tell her the scariest bedtime story of all, which is the story of a vice presidential candidate, an eventual vice president who walked up to a donut counter somewhere in America and had nothing to say to the person working that store. And I'm like, sports, if nothing else, is your passport to talk to everybody. Do not be JD Vance, who can even fake his way into referencing what happened in the game last night. Be a person who can be dropped in. And this is the lesson I learned as a sports journalist. I have been dropped into
Yeah.
weddings in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I have gone to Berkeley, California. And I'm sounding like Howard Dean now. We're going to go to Ohio. And it's just like, I can be anywhere in America and talk about sports with anyone. And that is a passport for a first generation American. My parents are from the Philippines. That's unthinkable. But I feel so comfortable and I want that power, right? The power to communicate with whoever you want, to make small talk whenever you need. I want that power to be also something my daughter has. It can feel like a cliche, but sometimes that's the thing that gets us from A to B on a day when things are really hard.
Yeah, I always wear a Mets hat, and when they were losing, I mean, I think they lost 19 games in May. Don't come at me if I have that wrong. The first 2 weeks of May, but it was when I had the most conversations with strangers. Was when I was wearing my Mets hat around New York while they were on that like 19 game losing streak. And you're right. It is sort of connection without initiating any conversation, but being available to be on the receiving end or to participate in a conversation. I want to ask you what you think from spending as much time as you do on shows like mine. I mean, you're from this world that is better than politics, the world of sports, I think. And I wonder what that sort of dual existence or having a foot in both worlds is like for you.
I love it. I love it so much. I remember being in the green room at Morning Joe, and it's like, wait a minute, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO wants to talk to me about the jets. Like it's this key. It's the skeleton key. And I love so something that I learned about being steeped in sports is that there is so much lore. There is so much of the character and the history and the detail, the stuff that can be very imposing and alienating for non-fans. That when I get to talk about sports to people who are not drowning in all of that, I get to revisit why I fell in love with it. talking about sports to people who are not native to it has been the biggest driving force in reaffirming that I fell into the right line of work. I mean, the secret, the dirty secret of all of this is that I came from ESPN with an audience full of dudes, and it has been something that I've been self-conscious about. I'm like, wait a minute, my audience is all like these younger dudes. Like, that's embarrassing. Like, I don't want to talk
No,
just to
that's so
them.
important.
But in the last 4 years, approximately, I've realized that that is this demographic that has eluded so
Everybody
many
else.
people in politics. And I'm
Literally
like, wait a
everybody
minute.
else except Trump. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, so why and how can my insecurity be actually this not just competitive advantage in terms of whatever I
Mhm.
want to do professionally, but this thing we can learn from? Like, why is it that they're clustering around these things but not these other things? And I think the shame of it, my belief, again, my thesis is that I think my show, what I do, is proof that there is a whole community of people who are open to the vegetables if you just melt some cheese on it.
Tell me the Pulitzer story. You're also now a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
It's surreal. It's surreal. I finally have now convinced my parents that I'm not going to medical school. The Pulitzer was a big step in that direction. Look, we did this investigation into Steve Ballmer and the Los Angeles Clippers. This is the richest owner in American sports, and what he did not want the public to know about his own, according to our reporting, side deals to pay players beyond what is permissible according to the NBA rules. Evasion of the salary cap is so much of that story. It involves carbon credits. It involves things that the more I say them aloud sound like vegetables, except because it's sports, it's been this joyride of like almost this true crime style series that somehow the Pulitzer jury recognized as something that is worthwhile. We often do stupid things seriously and serious things stupidly on our show. We try to be very deliberate about how we will do a lot of the high-minded stuff that I think people who follow politics and news will appreciate. But also, we're committed to like making this authentically a good time. And I love that it got recognized for those reasons.
Is there a lesson in there for the rest of us trying to get people to care about politics and voting rights and um, democracy and things like that?
My lesson comes through the lens of journalism, right? So my lesson is the job of a journalist, the job of investigating and holding people to account. It's one of the most badass jobs that you can imagine. I almost went to law school. I'm so glad I didn't because everything I thought law school
Mhm.
would be in terms of I get to be in a courtroom, I get to put someone on trial, I get to dramatically give some monologue at some point. Journalism is where you can actually put something like an impact out into the world. And so the lesson is um, fun, entertainment, those things are not mutually exclusive with substance. That's all sports. I learned it from sports. There is serious as well as silly. There is highbrow and lowbrow. There is Brandon Nimmo, but also a serious investigation into the president of the United States. Like these are all, they're not different worlds. It's the same one. And
Mhm.
if you care about sports and the world beyond, you realize that this is all kind of the same thing.
What keeps you up at night?
Oh man. What keeps me up at night is the fear that the public is waiting for these leaders who are in power to admit when something is wrong. As if like they're just waiting for the
Mm.
official press release from the White House or from the NBA or from any governing body. It's as if we need to hear the people who we are otherwise proving journalistically and otherwise through evidence
Yeah.
have done something wrong. We're waiting for them to confess
Mm.
before we see the light turn green. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not how this is going to go.
Yeah.
Like, and that gap between do you believe in the reporting or do you believe the person who is on record lying over and over again? That gap is the thing I hope everyone in sports will overcome, but I'm fearful that they won't. I think that's the gap that terrifies coaches and players as well as fans. You know, I'll believe it when the NBA admits to it. I'll believe it when the White House admits to it. I got news. They might not ever. They have
Hmm.
no incentive to.
Right.
And so this is where I think what we do, and what speaking truth to any semblance of power really means is addressing that gap and hoping that people don't wait for the people who are doing these things to have a change of heart, because I don't think that's coming.
Everyone's watching everybody else,
Yes.
but everyone can see that the emperor is buck-ass naked and worse. You've been so generous with your time. My last question is this fantasy that coaches and players will jump into politics is a good thing, a bad thing, neither.
I think we need people who've proven that they can communicate with an anti-political people, especially men. I think we need that fantasy to become reality. Um, I see what's happening on the other side of the aisle, and it's the dregs. That fantasy feels like a thing we can actually make real. And
Hmm.
so I just hope that people realize that whatever incentive you're waiting for is already glowing radioactive green. Like, it's time.
Pablo Torre, one of the best people we have a chance to talk to on the show and on this podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Nicole, thank you. And I hope the Mets.
Oh,
Mets get
God,
better.
they're so bad. They're so bad.